So this is something that's different from what I've made on this channel so far, where I share a little bit more about myself and what sorts of things I like. Beyond shooters and beyond gaming in general, I've had a number of other interests in my life, things that I would like to share. I used to hate reading when I was a kid. I never had the patience for it, until at some point in high school, where I read Path of the Eldar by Gav Thorpe, a novel within the Black Library based on the Warhammer 40k universe, a franchise that I'm really into. And in the course of that time, my desire to read eventually led me into the world of manga, the Japanese equivalent of comics, so to speak. I started off like a lot of other young boys did, the classic shonen and to some extent seinen material. Dragon Ball, Death Note, Naruto, Air Gear, even. On and off I would fluctuate between novels and comics, or manga so to speak. But over the years I would discover a treasure trove of other pieces of writing that I wasn't aware of at the time. And here I would like to share some of which have come to be some of my favorites. Starting off with the first one. Number 1. Blame. What we have here is a cyberpunk hellscape, filled with endless corridors, bridges, rooms the size of planets, elevators with hundreds of thousands of levels. That's the world of Blame in a nutshell. A place so large and vast that all of the inhabitants have lost track of time being there. It's a beautiful blend of sci-fi and horror, with some of the most realized architecture I've ever seen in a manga. Blame focuses on one particular character among the infinite hellscape, Killy, whose goal is to find someone with net terminal genes, something that can relink humanity into the net sphere, saving them from eventual extinction from the safeguards, which are the city's robots, so to speak. And for the entire story, he follows that goal to the very end of the story, which is told more so through the environments and atmosphere of what is called the city, rather than just giving you endless exposition. There isn't a lot of dialogue, and when there is, it gives you more context as to what's going on and how it got this bad in the first place. It's an incredible manga, filled with interesting designs in both the characters and the world of Blame itself. There's also a prequel manga called Noise, which I would highly recommend, for it reveals a lot of what actually happened. But before reading that, I would recommend reading Blame first. Number 2. Oyasumi Punpun. Manga is fantastic in its variety of genres. There is something for everybody. There is even manga that will make you feel like shit and feel a sense of life being pointless and not worth living. This particular manga will definitely put you in a negative mood like it did to me when I finished it all the way through. But that's not to say it's worth reading, however, for it is not only well told, but it also feels incredibly relatable. So relatable it's actually pretty scary. The story is told through the childhood and eventual adulthood of Punpun himself, but is shown and illustrated as a bird, as well as his family and relatives, and it stays consistent throughout his journey, albeit with changes here and there as he grows up. The catalyst for the events ahead is a girl named Aiko, someone who has a massive impact on his life, but not necessarily in a good way. And it's not just him, it also shows the perspective of other characters and their own problems as they all grow up, which we see through their childhood and when they finally become adults. There are very, very few happy moments in this story, and when you think things couldn't get any worse, they actually do. The biggest part that makes this story great, but also really depressing is, as I said, is how relatable the characters really are. Through the panels you feel the raw emotions that are felt. Their fall from grace feels genuine, as well as their brief moments of happiness. It left a big impact on me at the time, and it made me think about a lot how I viewed myself as well as other people. If you can't handle stories with heavy themes of abuse, depression, or suicide, I would not recommend this. But I would still say go for it. You can get so much of just reading it. But I wouldn't blame you if you decide not to pick it up again after finishing it. Number 3. Glyceride. Horror that is depicted in manga has a variety of different flavors. Some are based off of Japanese folklore, traditional westernized horror, psychological horror like Monster, or paranormal horror like The Drifting Classroom. But Junji Ito's work is in a sense the Eastern answer to the unknowns of cosmic horror, or just horror that is undescribable. He has this in spades with the works of Rumina, Uzumaki, Gyo, and many others. But he also has a number of amazing shorts, this one being my favorite of his, Glyceride, which is a story about a girl that's stuck in a home laid with an unending aroma of grease that gets worse over the course of the story. Her brother and father are in this cycle of consuming grease and going about their day, uncaring of the fact that the smell and presence of grease is growing more potent. The daughter has lived with it long enough to the point of being able to calculate the saturation of it. There are some really disgusting moments, and you start thinking why the girl doesn't just leave. It's his least supernatural story out of all the others, but it is still my favorite, on the merit of being centered around this possible nightmare of not only living like this, but getting used to it, which is even more horrifying. Number 4. The Enigma of Amigara Fault. Another one of Junji Ito's great short stories, which is a story about a mountain containing a number of human-shaped holes, which are discovered after an earthquake taking place. The main characters, as well as a number of other people, go to the quake site and begin to notice these holes. The eerie aspect of this story is that every hole is carved for every individual there, even the main characters, down to their size, and this compulsion to go inside starts to take over. We never find out what is inside, or what the whole thing was about, or what was going to happen to them. But the story invokes the feeling of claustrophobia in a horrific manner. The idea of being immobile with no space to move around is nightmare fuel, especially in the context of a cave or inside of a mountain where getting stuck inside becomes more likely the longer you stay in there, and also realizing that you cannot get out. The Enigma of Amigara Fault is laced with heavy themes of temptation, compulsion, the innate desire to harm yourself, so to speak. Unlike a lot of his other stories, where there is a clear and present threat, like the Spiral Curse from Uzumaki or the Planet Eater from Rumina, the threat in this story is the idea of racing towards one's own death, or to give into your compulsions knowing that you'll never get out. It's arguably his best short story, tied with this one as well as another fantastic one called The Long Dream. Number 5. Vagabond. Manga, for the most part, generally speaking, has a consistent art style with different variations across the board, where many drawers add slightly different spins to the pre-existing art styles in place. But Takahiko Inoue draws something else entirely, something that I've been hard-pressed to find that illustrates the world in such a photorealistic manner, which is what he does here in both the world as well as the characters. I would go as far to say that it probably has some of the best panels ever made, in both illustration and writing. The story of Vagabond is based on the legendary Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, where we see him as a young boy to the man he would eventually become. The fights here are incredibly intense. At any moment it could end with one mistake, because of how fatal their weapons truly were at the time. It also has a wide range of different characters that we get to see throughout the whole saga, coupled with the beautiful panels and attention to detail based on historical Japan. The history bleeds throughout these panels. The characters act and behave like they had existed in that time, which shows how much dedication was centered towards this whole story. To my knowledge, the story is currently on a hiatus, but there's still a wealth of chapters to read here to keep you occupied, and it is still worth reading if you're into historical tales. Number 6. Berserk. What we have here is a manga that is both iconic and is almost every manga video or list that has been made so far. Berserk. The story that has it all. Intense action, incredible world building, memorable and outstanding illustrations, characters that have layers of depth and personality that enhances the whole world, and one of the most iconic weapons and characters in both manga and anime. The Dragon Slayer sword, carried by the Black Swordsman himself, Guts, who is both cursed and near impossible to kill, who goes up against the horrors of the world, both in men and eventually the creatures that he will come to fight later on. The story begins with what he has become now, when he was known as the Black Swordsman, but eventually it goes back in time to his childhood, from what happened to him then, eventually growing up and becoming a mercenary, and one day meeting Griffith, the leader of the Band of the Hawk, who becomes the catalyst for everything that takes place afterwards, and someone that changes Guts' life forever, in a pretty fucked up way. Berserk was so influential as a story that the creator of Dark Souls took inspiration from it, drawing parallels with characters like Artorias of the Abyss, who has a striking resemblance to Guts when he dons the Dragon Slayer armor. The designs of the world, the monsters, the presence of the characters themselves, and how they're portrayed make for a cruel and unforgiving world that is Berserk, and from beginning to its supposed end, it's quite a ride. Tragically, the creator of Berserk passed away some time ago, but his work is still enjoyed and puzzled over, and still inspires the next generation of artists and writers to continue creating more manga. And finally, number 7, Fuanatane, also known as Seeds of Anxiety. Unlike the other mangas I've mentioned here, this one is more along the lines of an anthology, where a number of stories are more or less self-contained but follow the same consistent theme, which is that of paranormal activities. Each story lists a date of said incident, where we see our characters deal with strange occurrences, from abnormal behaviors to strange entities appearing out of nowhere, which the characters themselves generally respond with unease and terror. They're incredibly short, some even being only one panel, but the drawing and illustrations are really well done and quite scary, and some, like this particular panel, is pretty unnerving. For me, paranormal horror is hit and miss. It doesn't always work, but Fuwa no Tane comes off as scary without the need to display blood and gore all the time. Instead, it presents a gauntlet of psychological terror by showing things we're glad don't exist. There are several volumes of this series, and they're all anthologies. Another good series I'd recommend from the same author is PTSD Radio. If you're looking for horror manga outside the realm of Junji Ito, then I'd start off with this one. And that's it for the time being. I have many more manga stories that I personally love and enjoy, but these ones are my absolute favorites. Manga is a goldmine for rich world building and storytelling that can tackle a number of themes, both light and dark. If you want to get started in reading manga, I would highly recommend the ones I have talked about in this video. Thank you for watching.